So Midjourney just casually decided to release version 5.2 with tons of new features and completely messed up my weekly schedule because now I have to record this video today. So you can now actually turn this image into this image and then into this image and even into this image. So obviously I need to comment on this and we're going to have to go over the release notes first. So buckle up because there's a lot to cover. Let's go through these one by one. I'm going to move myself over here. And first of all, we've got the new aesthetic system, which apparently improved aesthetics and gives us sharper images now. And they've slightly improved the coherence and the text understanding. Also increased diversity, although I can't really comment on that yet because I haven't been testing it enough. And they did make a change to the stylized parameter, which apparently was broken until now. I wasn't really aware of this, or I didn't really notice it much because there clearly were differences in the stylization as you were using it, but it seems like the higher values just weren't providing you with as much stylization as we were used to. But I decided to have a closer look and I compared some images that I created last week with stylized to what they would look like if I used them now. Here's the prompt that I used to do the comparison, and you'll see that I'm using permutations as well, simply because I needed to create all 6 variations of this prompt. And in one variation, I'm using version of 5.1, and the other one 5.2, and then I'm just iterating through stylization values of 0, 100, and 1000. Oh, and as you can see, I've also entered the seed, just in case you want to replicate my results. So let's start off with version 5.1. Here's the image with a stylized value of 0. This one is with a stylized value of 100, the default. And just a tiny slight change with 1000. So clearly there was something broken in the system. So now let's have a look at version 5.2. And here's the one with 0 as a stylized value. Pretty bland, but yeah, what you would expect. Then 100, a lot more stylized. And then 1000. Clearly now we can see that whatever they've changed, it's had a massive impact. And this is kind of much closer to what we were used to when we were using stylized in earlier versions of Midjourney. Personally, even though I didn't really notice before, I guess it's a good thing because this gives you a lot more control, right? So if even if you want to go really overboard, you can do this now. Whereas earlier, I guess, yeah, there was a certain limit to how far you could go. Okay, so let's go back to the release notes and have a look at the next line item, which is new high variation mode. This is something that I personally think was overlooked by a lot of people on social media. It's turned on by default now, so you wouldn't really notice whether it was on or off. You can technically turn it off if you go into your settings panel and just, hit the toggle. But I would generally recommend you just leave it as it is because you will be able to switch between high and low variation as you're prompting. And I'll show you that in a second. All right, so let me just quickly go back to my private server where I'm going to retrieve an old job of mine. Just wait a few seconds. And there you go. And what I'll do next is I'll upscale one of these images. I'm going to pick the 4th one. Unfortunately, I can't use the first one because I've done that one already. But what you'll notice now below this image is that you've got 2 extra buttons here. You've got the very strong and the very subtle button. What these buttons do is that when you click them, they will create new variations, however, with different levels of variation. So if you hit the very subtle button, you'll see that it opens up another remix prompt. And after it finishes generating these images, you'll see that it's given me 4 more variations based on that upscaled image, and they're all just slightly different. So this is very close to the sort of variations that you would be able to generate earlier. But let me show you what happens if I hit the very strong button. And by the way, this remix prompt only opens up because I have remix mode activated. If you do not have remix mode activated, most likely it will not show up. But let me quickly generate these. All right, cool. So what you'll see here now is that these images are variations of our previously upscaled image, and they are still depicting more or less the same thing, however, with considerably more variation in terms of the composition. So this is particularly useful if you are planning on re-rolling a lot, trying to figure out, what is the best image to use. It's a really, really small detail. And again, not many have been talking about this in the past 24 hours, but I personally think this is actually a really, really neat little improvement in the overall workflow. All right, so let me head back to Midjourney, to the release notes, and we'll take a look at the third item on our list, which is the shorten command. And this basically allows you to enter a certain prompt using the shorten command, and that will then analyze your prompt in order to determine which of the words that you have in your prompt are more likely to be actually useful and which are not useful at all, or pretty much useless. So I actually think this is a really interesting feature because it's going to shed a lot of light on the usefulness of very, very long prompts. It's going to create a lot of transparency in terms of which words are really useful, which are not. And what I decided to do is I went into one of the newbie channels and I picked out the longest prompt that I could find. And then I decided to have a look at what that image or what that prompt would generate as an image. And here's just what the prompt looks like. It's incredibly long. I didn't even bother to count the tokens, but let's see what this generates for us. Okay, cool. And I think there's absolutely no doubt about the fact that these images do look pretty cool. I mean, that's what Midjourney does, right? It produces amazingly awesome images. But is it really because of the long prompt, or is it just because Midjourney is so good? So what we'll do, just in order to check, how much useful words are in this prompt, let's enter the shorten command. And we start off with shorten, and then I enter the exact same prompt, and I ask Midjourney to analyze it. And what you'll see here now is that it has completely reduced my prompt to these shortened prompts, these 5 shortened prompts. Now, we don't necessarily need to go with the lowest one here, but you can clearly see that it's cut out all of these words. It's highlighted a few words, and it looks like it's saying that at least number 1 is just as good as using this incredibly long prompt. Now, you'll notice there's another button down here called Show Details. If I click on Show Details, it'll give me a lot more analysis as well. And it looks like the only real words that matter in this prompt are effectively these 5 here. And it's almost just tornado. It's pretty crazy how the tornado gets a weighting of 1 and massive maybe 0.12, but the rest of the words are effectively not doing anything. So because I was curious as to whether this would produce something similar, I decided to take the very first one of these and go with Imagine. I'll add my aspect ratio, and let's see what these give us. Okay, and let's open up these here, and I think obviously they're not the exact same images as before, but I think it's fair to say that there's not a huge difference, right? So if you have the option of using an overly complicated, bloated prompt as before, or just using the shorted one, well, what are you going to do? And the benefit of using the shorted one is that you actually know which parts of your prompt are actually doing anything. Whereas with the other one, it's just rolling the dice. You're demonstrating that you have absolutely no clue what you're doing. You're just copying a huge bunch of text, pasting into the Imagine command, and having a look at what it creates. Okay, so this is a pretty cool feature as well. But let's look at the notes one last time, because there's one thing that you have all come here for, which is the new zoom out feature. So what Midjourney has done is it's finally given us at least some form of outpainting. And it's a very rudimentary version of outpainting, to be honest. But that's mainly, I think, due to the fact that the UI in Discord is so limited. So they need to figure out how to implement this in a way that's easy to use with the restrictions that they have right now. So this new zoom out feature essentially comes with 3 sub-features. The first one being zoom out by a factor of 1.5 or by a factor of 2. These are essentially simplified buttons just to make it easy for you to use. Then they have a make square button, which I'll show you what it does in a minute. And then they have a custom zoom, which is a more advanced version of zoom out. And I'll show you in a minute what that does, because that's pretty awesome. So the best way to do this is to go back into my private server and walk you through a process of using all of these features in a certain sequence. It doesn't need to be a specific sequence, but I'm going to do it in a certain sequence. So I'm going to start off by using the following prompt, which is just a basic image prompt where I'm blending 2 images together. And I'm using these 2 images that you see on screen right now, which I got from Unsplash. And you could obviously use a text prompt for this, but I'm just using these image prompts here right now because I like the images that they produced. And let me quickly generate these. Okay, and once they're done, let's have a real quick look. This is our new set of images, and this is going to be our starting point. So from these, I'm going to pick, let's say, I'm going to pick the top left one, and I'm going to upscale it first. And once it upscales, you'll notice that these 4 buttons down here show up. Zoom out 2x, zoom out 1.5x, custom zoom, and make square. Now, you'll only see the make square button whenever you have an upscaled image that is a non-square format. If it is already a square, then you will not see this 3rd button. But in this case, it is more of a rectangle, and that's why we have this button. So that's why I'm going to start off by clicking on the make square button. And what make square does is it basically fills the area around the edges of the image in order to create a new image that is a square. So it's kind of like a fill-in, if you wish, but it will only fill in this left side and this right side of the image in order to make it a perfect square. All right, so that's already pretty cool. And if you have a look, we've gotten a lot more context around the original image, and we're getting a feeling for what the room might look like. So from these, we'll pick another one to upscale. So in this case, I'm going to use, I don't know, maybe take the bottom left one this time. So I'll hit upscale U3. And this time you can see that I no longer have that make square button because the image is a square already. So what I'll do this time is going to hit the zoom out 1.5x button. And what this will do is it will zoom out. It will basically widen the perspective of the camera, similar to stepping away from the subject or using a more like a wider camera lens. And you'll also get more context. So let's just wait until this finishes. All right, cool. So now we're getting a much better feeling for what the room actually looks like. We're starting to see like a carpet here. The window's getting bigger. There is some strange stuff going on here in the top left corner, which I would say are artifacts, but we'll ignore it for now because I want to show you some other features as well. So we're going to pick another one of these to upscale. I'm going to take the bottom right this one time, U4. This time we're not going to hit the zoom out 2x button, but instead the custom zoom button, because the custom zoom button not only allows us to change how far it should zoom out. So in this case, I would use 1.9. And by the way, you can use any value between 1 and 2, as long as it's like a decimal. But what you can also do is you can also change the aspect ratio. And this is actually a huge thing, because just look at what happens once our image finishes generating. And what this does, it gives us so much more context in this space, and you get a much better feeling for the room. Now, I have to admit that in this particular example that I chose here right now, like this is improvised, to be honest, some of the images don't look that great. So we have a lot of artifacts up here and over there, and things do get crazier the more you tend to zoom out. Let me just show you this with one last attempt. I'm going to choose the top right image this time. I'm going to upscale that. And then we hit the zoom out 2x button. Okay, and you can clearly see that the further we zoom out, the more information we get, but things also tend to get a bit weird, right? Things are a little bit blurry over there. I'm not really sure whether this can be considered photography. It almost looks like it's a 3D rendering. So this example right here didn't turn out as great as it normally would, to be honest. But you see, we're still all just experimenting with this and trying to figure out what does it do, what works well, what does not work well. And rather than just showing you all the pretty pictures that are perfect, I might as well just show you how it works in practice. And just to prove a point that these can turn out so much better, let me show you an example that I did earlier that turned out absolutely awesome. So on the earlier set, I started out with an image that looked very similar to the ones that we started off with just now. And then I zoomed out with a custom zoom and I got these here, which were absolutely crazy. Just look at this. These are absolutely beautiful. So many details, so much variation. These look like real interiors. So I repeated the process and then I got these here, which are basically just zoomed out further. But just imagine these rooms. If you're an interior designer, this will give you so many great ideas. And from these, I finally settled on that particular image, just to show you something more zoomed in, something that's a bit larger, so you can see all the tiny details. Now, I actually want to show you another example of a very different scene using a text prompt. So let me just quickly show you the text prompt on screen. Photo of an old steel factory worker sitting inside a claustrophobic workshop, intense, moody, cyberpunk, version 5.2, and an aspect ratio of 16:9. My original image looked like this. And then I decided to zoom out once with 2x. And then I zoomed out again, and I zoomed out again, and I zoomed out even further, and then I zoomed out even further. So I'll stop right here, but I think you kind of get the point. Sometimes this will work really, really well, and you can just keep on going endlessly. In other cases, it'll start to go a little bit off the rails, and it'll just produce pretty strange results. But it's just amazing to see what you can do with this. Now, the only caveat here is that none of these features actually increase your resolution. So you're still, within the constraints of the version 5 resolution. And if you want to have something bigger, then you're going to have to use an external upscaler to do it. Version 5 just doesn't have an additional upscaler yet. And it's been like this ever since v5, and version 5.1 was the same. So what these features actually do is they just stuff more information into the same frame with the same sort of megapixel constraints. Now, bear in mind, this is all still very new. These are just my initial thoughts, and there's still going to be a lot of experimentation going on over the next couple of weeks, and probably even just in the next few days. So I'll leave you with that and let you experiment and play around throughout the weekend. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with these new features because they're going to open up so many possibilities for all of your projects. And they're a very first step towards some real outpainting features. And I think we can all be excited for what the future holds with Midjourney. So that's it for today. And you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you next time. Take care.